and welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today, we're going to talk about natural disasters. And I'm sure you can speculate as to why I chose this topic. I actually was going to do something completely different this week. On a personal note, this past weekend on Saturday was the 1-year anniversary that I lost my best friend and soulmate, my kitty cat Yuna. We had her put down a year ago. So it was a hard enough weekend. But then just before that, something interesting happened, didn't it? Many of us here in the United States are reeling from the devastation of Hurricane Ian. I don't know why I kept pronouncing it Ian. That's not correct. But anyway, Hurricane Ian left quite a set of devastation behind. Levels I think I can only compare with Hurricane Katrina. This was big, and I think we're all pretty well aware of it. Any of us who've been following the news know just what a massive, massive storm this was and the amount of damage it has caused. On a personal level, my parents were definitely affected by this. They're snowbirds. They have a winter place down right outside of Port Charlotte, which was the worst hit area. Their home was destroyed, along with many of the other people in their community. So they're right now processing the fact that they are going to have to spend their winter up here, back in Ohio, with me, darn. But more than that, not only was their darn near brand new place totaled and destroyed, they're missing out on their fun time. I always say they're like kids at summer camp when they go down there for the winter, because they're in this beautiful community with all these other retirees, and they just have such an amazing time down there, and they're missing out on all of them. And it wasn't just my parents. That whole community's been affected. Almost everybody they know lost their homes as well. And the people that live down there full time, they've lost their only homes. So, and of course, my parents were up here. They're fine. The park where they reside in the winter is mostly empty in the summer. So there wasn't many people there. But obviously my parents recognize they're very, very, very fortunate that, they have their home up here and they were not there, and they are safe and okay, when a lot of other people are not. So let's get into that. Let's talk a little bit about grief after natural disasters. I found several. I just Googled, grief after natural disasters to see what all I could find. And there's so much out there, which does not surprise me whatsoever. Just reading through this, a lot of this rings familiar to me as PTSD, which it kind of is. Natural disasters are a traumatic event. So a lot of the symptoms of after grief are those of PTSD and can turn into that as well. So, I mean, whether the trauma is a disaster, natural or human caused, grief at the loss of these loved ones is complicated and can also be mixed in with anger at, the loss of their home, their possessions. And I mean, obviously fear and anxiety about their sense of safety and security, and in, my parents' case, their sense of community, their friends. But a lot of times, the grief can be put off because there's so much happening directly after an event like this. Dealing with all the aftermath can delay your grief. You don't have time to start processing that grief because you're calling insurance companies, you're working on cleanup, you're going through your belongings. If there's anything left, you're trying to figure out where the heck you're going to live. There's so much going on and so many little things to take care of that you don't even think about your grief until things have settled down. And that's when it sinks in. By that point, it's been so long and you've had all these underlying symptoms that you haven't even recognized yet that are going to start to pop up, and they're going to get ugly. I did find an interesting little tidbit it was actually through the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which, seems weird, but they had a little article on coping with grief after a disaster or traumatic event, because a disaster is a traumatic event. But there was something rather interesting I read in there. Hold on. Yeah, it was exactly what I was just talking about. After a disaster or other traumatic event, many factors can disrupt the normal process of grieving, raising the risk for complicated or traumatic grief. So, as I said, you're dealing with all of the nuts and bolts of everything you have to deal with after this, that you're delaying processing your grief, which can just complicate it and make the grieving process even more difficult because you've delayed it for so long. Obviously not on purpose. The other interesting thing I found is it was in the National Library of Medicine for the National Center for Biotechnology Information through World Psychiatry. It's a mouthful. This kind of struck a chord with me, and just hear me out on this. I'm going to read this through, and then I'm going to read this through, and we'll go from there. So, natural disasters are occurring globally at an increasing rate, especially due to the upward trend of hydrometeorological disasters. Most of these natural disasters are unpredictable and rapid. Consequently, often many thousands experience immense losses with considerable subsequent social and economic hardships. However, the World Health Organization estimated only 5 to 10% of those in disaster-affected communities develop serious emotional and mental health problems, which will need intervention. So what's nice is that there are services available, especially after something like a flood or a hurricane or a forest fire. There will be organizations around to help with that, and they will have services available to help people, not just with physical things, but with their mental and emotional health as well. But a majority of natural disasters occur in developing countries, where the availability of professional mental health services is very limited. So it's just something to think about. Now, that said, this is not the time to bring politics into this conversation, and I'm not going to do that either. But we're all recognizing, and you can try to deny all you want, but there are more and more natural disasters have always been around. And we've gone through ebbs and flows throughout the history of planet Earth. And planet Earth has been through this number of them before, but it was before us or before recorded history at least. But they are increasing. That's all I'm going to say about that. You can blame climate change, which I think that is definitely a part of this. But again, this is not the place to bring politics into this, especially after something like what we just went through with Hurricane Ian. There are... the last time I checked, I think the death count was at close to 100 at this point. So close to 100 people have died because of this. And I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of people, maybe thousands, are without homes now. They have nowhere to go, and they have lost everything they have. The last thing they need is somebody getting in their face and telling them that climate change is not real and they're stupid. Okay, I'm not going to get on a rant, because I promise I'm not going to bring politics into my conversations ever, because that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about grief. I'm just saying to be gentle and to be kind and compassionate with anybody who is suffering any type of grief whatsoever. Do not bring politics into it. Period. End of story. Now, if the grieving person wants to have a political rant, let them. Hear them out. Don't fight with them. Don't argue with them. Let them feel what they're feeling, because they're grieving and they're hurting. Okay? That's all I'm going to say about that. So, I can dive briefly into typical reactions and symptoms of grief surrounding a traumatic event or a natural disaster, but they're the same things I say in almost all my episodes, confusion, difficulty sleeping, anger, sadness, depression, and, these can work into physical symptoms, headaches, things like that. But as I always say, it's when these reactions and feelings are starting to interfere with your daily life is when you need to seek out help. And don't be afraid to seek out help. However, with a traumatic event or a natural disaster, the emotional reactions tend to be stronger, right? As I said, this is compared most of the time to PTSD, because it is. It's stress after a traumatic event, right? So the reactions and the feelings are going to be a lot stronger. There can be really bad flashbacks, nightmares, hypersensitivity, being terrified of any type of weather event. If you've survived a horrendous hurricane and lost everything you had, a thunderstorm might roll through And you're going to feel all those feelings again. They're going to bring it back up because your brain and your physical body is going to get those physical cues of a weather-related event, and your emotional body then is going to remember that and go back to the feelings it had last time. Now, some other things that can come up out of this is not just those who are directly affected, but there is secondhand grief or survivor's guilt. I had a whole episode on survivor's guilt. I know I absolutely, every time I hear about hurricanes devastating an entire area, of course I feel terrible. And sometimes I do have a little bit of survivor's guilt. It's like, well, gosh, I live in a place where we don't get hurricanes. We get the tail end of it where it's just a bad thunderstorm for us up here. And, I have all of this, and these people, how many thousands and hundreds of people are just homeless now, or they've lost everything. Sure, I have a little bit of survivor's guilt with that. I feel like that's kind of normal. I feel like that's not a bad thing. Okay, so you've survived a horrendous tragedy or natural disaster. What do you do? How do you cope with this? Well, first of all, let yourself feel your feelings. Do not wait. Don't bottle them up. Take time to sit and grieve everything you have just lost. Don't bottle them up. Don't push them aside. Like I said, it's really easy for that to happen. It's easy to say, I'll deal with my grief later. Right now, I have to call the insurance company. I have to work through this cleanup. I got to figure out where. And that's true. You do have to do those things, but allow yourself the space and time to grieve and to feel your emotions and to express them however you need to express them. So provided you're not hurting anybody around you. That's my caveat. If your way of dealing with your emotions is to beat up somebody around you, that's not good. Please don't do that. Give yourself time. Let yourself feel your feelings. Do not hesitate to accept support, especially if this is a part of a huge disaster. Like I said, there will be organizations around, FEMA, Red Cross, maybe some local churches. There will be groups around that will be helping you and offering support and assistance. Don't refuse that. Take it. Don't be too proud to ask for help if you need it. Don't say, oh, I'll figure it out on my own. No. They're there for a reason. They want to help you. Let them help you, especially when it comes to your grief and your emotions. If you are offered support, take it. Give yourself time. I've never been through something like this. I can't fathom it. Well, no, my parents suffered another disaster a few years ago. While they were in Florida, their house flooded. I was the one that found it. It was in the middle of winter. It was a really, really bad winter. We had a bunch of ice storms and a pipe burst, and the water ran for a solid 2 weeks, flooding their entire house, or at least half of their house. And I was the one that found it. And it's not funny. I don't joke about it, but I do say I have like my mini PTSD thinking about, I can't tell you the feeling I felt when I pulled up to their house and saw the wall of ice on their garage. Anyway, but give yourself time. Be patient with yourself. It's going to take a while. Do what you need to do to work through your emotions. Like I said, I guarantee you, as I said, there will be organizations around to help. There are going to be support groups for victims of disasters and tragedies. Again, I'm not going to bring politics into this, but school shootings are a very, very big thing around the country. And there are so many different people that have been through this and lost children, to the point that there are now support groups for families and friends who were victims of school shootings. So there are these groups and these support systems exist. Take advantage of them. Use them if you need to. Take care of yourself physically. This is a big thing that has been I hound into people and has been hounded into me in the past. You have to take care of yourself physically too. You have to eat. You have to sleep. I know it's hard. There are times your sleep patterns might be disrupted. I've been there. I've had trouble sleeping. I've had bouts of insomnia, or I've had bouts where I sleep all the time. You have to take care of yourself physically. It'll help you deal with your stress better. Try to avoid using drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism. Okay? I always gotta say it. Do your best to establish if you can, some semblance of your normal routine. Obviously, if you're now homeless, your routine's going to be a little different. But if you can have some way of, if there's something you did once a day, like for me, every single day, unless it's pouring down rain or the weather is just way, way too cold or way, way too hot, I go for a walk on my lunch break. And I walk 2 to 3 miles every single day. I'll grab a raincoat if it's raining. I'll bundle up if it's really cold. Put on the sunscreen. But just that's that one little center I can schedule my whole day around, is knowing that I'm going to have that walk. So if there's that one thing you do, it doesn't necessarily have to be a walk or exercise, but if there's one thing you do once a day, maybe it's reading a passage out of the Bible, maybe it's reading from another book, do it if you can. Just try to give yourself something that is familiar and comfortable to you. Do not make any life-altering decisions. Don't. Now, that's really difficult, especially if you've just lost everything. But major life decisions like moving away, changing your job, getting a divorce, marrying somebody, maybe wait until this event has passed after some time and you can make more rational and well thought out decisions. Just saying. It's never a really good idea to make major life decisions right after a traumatic event, period. Now, for those of us who are not in Florida or nowhere near where Hurricane Ian hit, what can you do? Or if any other tragic event or natural disaster, if it did not happen directly to you, but it's affecting you, how do you cope with this? Well, again, acknowledge your feelings, acknowledge your emotions, talk about it with other people. Just always remember that if you're feeling guilt about not being affected or relief, that's okay. So many people, and I've felt relief too when my brother passed away. I've been open about that. I've had feelings of relief. And so many people feel that and they think that is the most evil, horrible thing in the world and they're a terrible person for feeling that. Well, you're not. Sure, it feels, quote unquote wrong to feel relieved that something like this has happened, but it's normal and it's okay. But feeling relief that you were not affected, that's okay. That's a perfectly valid reaction. Don't feel bad about it. Don't flaunt it. Don't walk around and say, sucks to be you, look at me. Obviously, don't do that. But if you're feeling relief that you were not affected, okay. You're going to feel guilt too, and that's okay. Take a break from focusing on the event. Turn off the television and radio. I had to. I was just so freaked out about everything going on in Florida and not knowing if my parents' home or any of their I have relatives that live in Florida. I have friends that live in Florida, and not knowing if they were okay or if they were safe or if their homes were safe. I all day Thursday I just sat and scrolled through every news station, and I had to take a break. I had to walk away from it. So take a break. Don't let it consume your entire life. If you have to avoid the news for a while, do that. I know I do that when another school shooting happens. I'll ingest the media to learn what happened, and then I need to walk away from it for a little while. I can't sit there and take in all that media around these things. It's hard. So I know I need to do that to protect myself. If you're feeling guilt or relief and you want to help somehow, volunteer. Donate money. See if you can go to the Red Cross. See if they need anything. Donate blood if you can do that. That's like anytime after a natural disaster, they're always looking for blood, donated blood. They're looking for blood donated voluntarily. So if that's something you can do, do it. Do what you can to try to help. If you know somebody specifically that you can help them with a need, giving transportation, taking their pet for a while, taking their kid for a while, looking after another family member, laundry, food, anything you can do. If that'll make you feel better, do it. But as always, as I always say, whatever you're feeling is normal and okay, right? It's how you handle it and how you process it that matters. And if you need help, get help. It's okay. All right. That was a lot. It was heavy. We've gone through a lot as a nation or as a world, with this. And so many other things are going on all over the world all the time. There's natural disasters, there's human disasters, there's wars, there's so much, right? So there's always going to be something going on in this world. And us casual bystanders watching all of this happening, it's easy to get overwhelmed. So take care of yourself. Okay? Awesome. All right. Now, deep breath. Let it out. Awesome, guys. Okay. let's move on to the death deck. We have our weekly question. I'm sorry. And now it's time for the death deck. I'm such a weirdo. All right, so I got my my death deck here, and I am going to shuffle it up, and I'm going to draw from the back of the deck where they have multiple choice questions. Okay. Ooh, okay. I think about my spouse or a significant other dying tragically. A, every time they're late and don't report in. B, once in a while when they're on long road or plane trips. Or C, only when they do things to annoy me. Man, I'm somewhere in between A and B. My husband works very odd hours and sometimes works very, very late. There are times where he doesn't get home till 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And if I wake up for work, I wake up at 5 every day. If I wake up and he's not home yet, that's when I worry. I don't necessarily immediately assume he's died tragically, but I will worry. But yeah, when he's gone on longer road trips, or especially if he's flying somewhere, I'll obviously think about like, oh no, what if something happens to him? Of course I do. He works with power tools a lot, and he climbs up on he climbs up on grids and ladders that are 60 feet off the ground. So, yeah. But no, I don't think about it when he does things to annoy me. That's terrible. Okay, you guys, that's it. We're gonna sign off here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've got something out of this. I got a beautiful Facebook message from somebody today who found my podcast and really loved it and just said very kind things to me that stroked my ego and made me very happy. But she said she was going to share it with a group she's part of. It's kind of not really a support group, but kind of a group for grief. And I was like, thank you. I appreciate that. So, hey, if any of you want to do that for me, that'd be awesome. Or review my podcast, like it, follow it. I guess if you put reviews on Apple Podcasts, that's a good thing. I don't know. I don't use Apple Podcasts. Yeah, so if you could do that, that'd be awesome. Don't forget to check me out on Patreon. As always, all the money I receive from Patreon goes directly to a fund to provide pro bono work to people who cannot afford my services and need help. Okay? Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you have a lovely week. It is autumn in Ohio, and I hope it's beautiful where you are. But just remember, feelings are valid, everything's okay, and grief doesn't always have to suck. Good Grief was brought to you by me. You can find me online at nikkithedeathdoula.com. Today's episode was produced by me. Research and scripts written by me. Your host is me. Editing and sound design also me. Music is not me. Music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod. License information can be found at filmmusic.io/standard-license. Special thank you to my best friend and husband for constantly reassuring me that I don't suck.